About the rest of the, for this part of the story at least, I'm going to give it to you in what I'm going to call raw format. Now, some of you might be old enough to remember the old-fashioned DOS computer that ran on DOS commands. Then Windows came along, and yeah, Windows still uses some of the same DOS commands, but they're embedded in Windows. What am I getting at? Well, the story I'm about to tell, I'm not going to try to interpret. I'm not going to give my opinions on what I think. I'm just going to tell it the way it was told at the time. Now, there are some supernatural elements involved, some things that we might call metaphysics. It deals in subjects like witchcraft. I'm not going to attempt to explain it. I'm just simply going to tell you what the people living at the time said happened. The people who wrote this were the most educated people living in Europe at the time. And folk, there's some things about this upcoming story that defies a natural explanation. And then when I'm through, any of you want to comment, you're welcome to. But the woman I'm talking about is Joan of Arc. Alright. Joan of Arc lived on a town at the border between France and Germany called Do-Re-Mi. It may sound like musical notes, Do-Re-Mi. The village of Do-Re-Mi. And her father was a hard-working man, trusted by the local overlord. So her father was somewhat wealthy for a peasant, wealthier than an average peasant. He had 5 children, of which Joanne was the middle child. She had at least one brother, actually I believe she had 2 brothers, but she was the third of 5 children. And she became extremely concerned about the deplorable condition of France. It seemed like France was about to be overrun by the English, and Joan did not want it, so she would pray often, "O Lord, save France." She spent some time talking to the local priest, who comes across as being a highly intelligent man. He somewhat understood her, and he was in sympathy with her concern. As she grew up, she believed she heard voices from her favorite saints, St. Michael, St. Margaret, and St. Catherine. And these saints told her, "Rise up, go to the king, collect an army, and you are going to defeat the English." Well, she first told her voices to her father. Her father gave her a good sound whipping. That was the way fathers often dealt with these things nowadays. And for a while, Joanne was quiet. Well, that didn't satisfy her. Her brother told her, "Hey, such thoughts are not for a girl. Women have other things to do. You should have your mind on other things. We men will take care of this." No, that didn't satisfy her. Well, she finally went to the local lord, Sir Robert Gomez, and no, Sir Robert's name would never be remembered except for Joanne. But she went to Sir Robert. Now, I want to explain here. In those days, it was not uncommon for women to join the army. It is known a lot of women fought in the 100 Years' War, and a lot of them fought with distinction. It is also known that it was not uncommon for teenage peasant girls to go to see their local lord, their local duke, local overlord, because they would oftentimes have some suggestion for them, or some advice, or something that they wanted clarified. So it probably was not at all uncommon when Joanne went into the court of Sir Robert. However, she told him, "Sir Robert, God has told me that you're to send me to the king, that I'm to get an army and I'm to drive the English out of France." Well, yes, she was laughed out of court. That was the first time. Her father was terribly embarrassed and gave her another sound whipping, and that solved the problem for a little time. However, Joanne went back to Sir Robert. She went back again. This time it was said that Sir Robert did not laugh as hard, but the time was to come when Sir Robert did not laugh at all. Now, folks, somewhere along the way we've lost the record of what she said to Sir Robert or how she persuaded Sir Robert. But in some way, she persuaded Sir Robert to send some of his best troops with Joanne to the king in Paris. By this time, the word of Joanne was spreading around, and Joanne's name was being talked about all over the place, including among the English. In those days, it was said that if you felt like you heard voices from God, Either the voices came from God or the devil. You were either a saint or a witch, and it had no room for anyone in between. Well, now, about 25 or so, 30 years ago, there was a story that came out that Joan of Arc, the reason she was so concerned that she really was Charles the 12th illegitimate daughter, and that Charles the 12th, in an attempt to hide who she was, had sent her to a village on the edge of his realm and told us and promised to her parents, like, I'll pay you money, just keep her quiet and keep her quiet that you've heard from me. But Charles the 12th, Charles the 6th, did not want anyone to know that he had an illegitimate daughter. Be that as it may, that would make her the half sister of Charles the 7th. Be that, that is one story that's been told. If that be the case, it makes it easier for us to understand why that Sir Robert would decide to send her to the king. She might have revealed that to him. But at any rate, to this day, the people living in this part of France are proud to say that they sheltered Joan of Arc on a trip to see the king. She traveled at night to avoid being seen, and then the troops would hide under haystacks, or she and the troops would hide under haystacks, or inside barns, or anywhere they could, or even in the woods, anywhere they could hide in the daytime, get up at night and travel. All the reason for traveling at night was to avoid being seen by English troops who might have captured her. And she went to where the king was staying. As I already mentioned, the king had already been driven out of his palace in Paris and was living in a smaller town, but he still lived in the castle. Now, folks, this is a part of the story that not many people will tell, but a few biographies have mentioned it. When she got to the palace, one of the guards made fun of her and taunted her. She said, "Watch what you say, for your death is near." Within an hour, that guard was dead. All right, now this is in the book, this next story. Again, this part of the story, folks, was written by the most educated minds at the time. The king wanted to make a dunce of her. So the king called to one of his lackeys and said, "Hey, you're my size. You and me step in the next room and change clothes." So the king dressed in lackey clothes. The lackey dressed in the king's clothes. Then the lackey went out the room with all the servants. Oh yeah, this is a lackey. The lackey sat on the throne with a scepter and a royal robe and a crown on his head, impersonating the king, which normally would have been illegal, but in this case they had a point to make. The king, dressed with the courtiers, the real king, dressed with the courtiers, sat among the courtiers with a tray in his hand, looking like a servant. Joanne entered the room, supposedly having never seen the king before, and she bowed down before the king and did obeisance. The king tried to say, hey, look, I'm just a lackey. What are you doing obeisance before? She said, "Arise, O most noble king. You are the king of France." The king was finally appalled, and so was the entire court. And they had to admit they had seen something extraordinary out of this woman. So there was something different about her. Well, then again, the news of this spread like wildfire all over France. Joanne told the king, "Hey, give me an army, and I can lift the siege of Orleans." Well, the king was hesitant. It was something. This king had a difficult time coming to firm decisions anyway. But this, well, he tried to siphon her off to a bishop. He siphoned her off to another priest. Even had his archbishop examine her, and they examined her, and they were appalled at the answers she gave to questions. They tried to determine now, is she a virgin or not? Because witches were suspected of being non-virgins most all the time. They finally decided, yes, she is a virgin. Just simply everybody who examined her was astounded at her answers. And in fact, the king later, after she was gone, revealed that she had talked to him about things that he did not want known, that he had only whispered about in his whispered prayers to God, that nobody else knew, but she seemed to be as if she had been right there hearing the prayers. She knew all about him, including some of his most secret secrets. To make a long story short, an army started collecting, a big army, and everybody knew, including the king, why the army was there. The army was there because of Joanne. The one thing that Joanne did, she was not a military leader, but she filled her people with patriotism and pride at being French, and a sense of, hey, if she can do it, if she's willing, I'm willing. So volunteers were pouring in from all over the realm, and the king still had to decide, do I want to give this woman my army? Well, he finally did. Again, you cannot fault him for it. No historian I've ever seen will fault him for it. He gave her command of the army and sent her and the army off to Orleans. There they engaged the British. The British said she's a witch, she's a witch. The French were not sure. The English used arrows, and one of the arrows hit Joanne in the breast, and weak and stabbed with pain, she was carried off the battlefield. Then she learned that her army was losing, so she forgot her pain and pulled herself together, got up and went back and rallied the retreating troops, told them to turn back, filled them with infused with fire, convinced they could win. They turned back. She saved the day. And the Battle of Orleans was won. The siege was lifted. The English ran off in fast retreat. Battle number 1 went to Joanne. Well, the English became quite concerned, to say the least, quite fearful of her, so much so that one English officer resigned rather than fight her. For this, he was given what you might call a court-martial and publicly disgraced for cowardice. Joanne went on to win 3 more battles. After she'd won 4 battles, the French were infused with a whole lot of self-confidence. The king became very highly confident. Hey, you know, any king who's won his last 4 battles is going to go around the palace strutting around, and if the king felt confident enough that, hey, you know, with this, I can now have myself crowned. So, he had himself crowned, and as he had himself crowned, he was kneeling with his wife at one side of him, but he insisted Joanne be at the other side of him, so Joanne was at his left. There have been paintings made of the coronation. Joanne dressed in pale silver armor, and the king and his wife being crowned at Reims, the city of Reims, where the kings have been crowned always before. Now, until he was crowned, Joanne usually referred to him as the Dauphin, not king. The Dauphin was the title the French gave to the heir apparent, next in line to the throne, but she said, no, until you're crowned, I'll call you Dauphin. That word is pronounced either Dauphin or Dauphine. Your book gives both pronunciations. Anyway, King Charles was now the real king. Then Joanne, everything for Joanne went south after that. It went downhill. She insisted that the next step be to take Paris. Well, the king and his generals said, no, we're not ready to take Paris yet. No, not yet. We'll get Paris there, but not yet. She insisted, no, let's go to Paris, take back your capital, take back your palace. Well, the king and the generals said no. Joanne said yes. Joanne got her way, and she began to march to Paris. Again, apparently with not much protection. The Burgundians captured her. The Burgundians were soldiers for the Duke of Burgundy, who should have been on Joanne's side. The Burgundians captured her, and they handed her over to the British. The British tried her for witchcraft. The story of the question she gave and the answer she gave has filled up many books. Again, she seemed to answer with a whole lot of wisdom. However, at one point, her composure failed her, and she broke down and confessed to witchcraft. After the priest told her she would never, ever be forgiven, she was going to spend all of eternity in hell. She broke down and confessed to being a witch, and the priest said, okay, now you can hope for a long, long, long time in purgatory, but eventually, after many, many years, you'll be forgiven. She finally recanted her confession and said, I heard those voices. They were real. They were from God. They were directing me. So they sentenced her to be burned at the stake for witchcraft. So at the age of 21, in the year 1431, she was burned for witchcraft.